An elderly woman found a trembling K9 German Shepherd with 2 puppies at her doorstep. What she did next would melt hearts. He was shaking, cold, starving, and he wasn't alone. At her front door, an elderly widow opened her eyes to a sight she never expected, a trembling German Shepherd, ribs showing beneath his once proud coat, eyes full of fear. Tucked beneath him were 2 tiny puppies, clinging to his warmth. She didn't know where he came from. She didn't know his name. But the moment their eyes met, something shifted inside her. And what she chose to do would change not just their lives but an entire town's idea of compassion. It was just past 6 a.m. when Ethel Morgan unlocked the front door of her modest home on the edge of Shady Pines, a quiet, weathered little town in upstate New York. The morning air was colder than usual for spring, and a light drizzle painted the porch steps with a dull shimmer. Ethel, 74, wrapped tighter into her oversized wool cardigan and adjusted her glasses before reaching for the morning paper. She was expecting the usual, a quiet morning, hot coffee, and silence. But what she found instead stopped her in her tracks. There, curled up in the corner of her porch, was a German Shepherd. His body was shaking uncontrollably, his fur patchy and matted, clinging to his emaciated frame like a ghost of the strength he once had. Ethel's heart skipped a beat, not out of fear, but from an overwhelming wave of sorrow. He wasn't alone. Tucked into his belly were 2 tiny puppies, barely bigger than her hands, nestled against him for warmth. One was whimpering softly, the other lay still, eyes closed, ribs moving with fragile breaths. Ethel's voice caught in her throat. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, crouching slowly, careful not to startle them. The mother in her, the part that never faded, even with age, took over. The dog lifted his head weakly, one ear drooping, the other nicked and scarred. His eyes, though cloudy with exhaustion, locked onto hers. There was no growl, no bark, just a desperate, silent plea. She reached out her hand slowly. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're safe now." And to her amazement, the shepherd didn't flinch. He lowered his head into her palm and let out the softest, broken sound, a whine that cracked something open inside Ethel. "I'll be right back," she said softly. She returned moments later with an old quilt, 2 towels, and the leftover roast chicken from the fridge. Carefully, she laid the quilt down and helped the dog settle onto it, using the towels to gently dry the shivering puppies. The dog didn't resist. He simply watched her, alert but calm, as if understanding that he could trust this woman. Back inside, Ethel turned up the heat and cleared a space in her mudroom. She had never owned a dog in her life, her late husband had been allergic, but she knew this one couldn't be left in the cold. She laid out more blankets, filled a shallow bowl with water, and placed the chicken in a pie tin. When she returned to the porch, she found the shepherd trying to nudge one of the puppies to its feet, only to collapse beside them, wheezing from the effort. "You poor thing," she said, tears welling up. "You're just about done in, aren't you?" It took everything the dog had to lift his head as she carefully lifted the puppies, and then him, one by one, bringing them inside. That evening, after calling the town's only vet, who promised to come by first thing in the morning, Ethel sat beside the sleeping trio, watching them breathe. The shepherd, now named Ranger, after a hunch she had about his past, was sleeping for the first time in what looked like days. The pups had eaten, drank water, and curled into a nest of blankets. She didn't know who they were, where they had come from, or how they ended up at her door. But she did know one thing, they were hers now. And she would protect them just as fiercely as Ranger had protected his pups. As the rain tapped gently against the windows, Ethel whispered into the dim room, "You're safe now. Whatever happened before, it's over." But outside, across the woods that bordered her yard, a shadow moved. Watching. Waiting. Something about Ranger's past hadn't stayed behind. And soon, Ethel would realize just how much danger they were still in. The morning sun filtered through the curtains like gold, warming the wooden floors of Ethel's little kitchen. The smell of eggs and bacon filled the air, a quiet ritual she had kept for decades. But today, something was different. There were now 4 mouths to feed. Ranger lay curled in a corner of the mudroom, his head resting between his front paws, still exhausted. His ribs, though no longer shivering, stood out beneath his coat like painful reminders of what he'd endured. The 2 puppies, one with a little white patch on his nose, the other darker and smaller, slept tangled against his side. Ethel set the pan down with a sigh. "You poor things, where on earth did you come from?" She had barely slept, her thoughts running wild all night. That dog wasn't just any stray. She could feel it. The way he had shielded his pups. His composure, even in weakness. It wasn't normal. It was trained. Disciplined. Familiar with danger. Something about the way he reacted to sudden sounds, how his ears would perk up and his eyes scan the room in quick, methodical bursts, screamed military or police. She grabbed her old tablet, fingers trembling slightly as she typed, "How to identify a retired K9 dog." The results were chillingly close to what she'd already guessed. Scarred ears. Worn pads. Obedient. Silent watchfulness. Trauma responses. Ethel reached for the phone but hesitated. Who would she even call? The local police department? Animal control? Would they even care? Or worse, would they take him away? She looked over at Ranger again, no, at Kane, and knelt by his side. "So your name's Kane, is it?" she said with a gentle smile. "Well, I'm Ethel. And I suppose this is home now." Kane lowered his head to her lap, letting out a soft, tired breath. But even as calm settled over the small house again, something in Kane's posture remained tense. Because out there, somewhere in the trees beyond Ethel's fence, something from his past was still coming. That night, a storm rolled in. Thunder crackled across the sky like warning shots, and rain lashed against the windows of Ethel's home. Inside, the air was tense, not just from the weather, but from the memory of Deputy Ross' visit. Ethel sat in her worn recliner, an old book open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in over an hour. Her eyes kept drifting toward the mudroom, where Kane lay curled with his pups. He hadn't slept. Each time the wind howled, Kane would lift his head and scan the room, his ears twitching, his muscles tense. He was listening for something. Not the storm. Something more precise. Something specific. Ethel noticed. She always noticed. "You're not just scared of thunder, are you?" she murmured. The rain intensified. A branch knocked against the side of the house, and Kane jumped to his feet, moving between the pups and the door. His body was rigid, tail low, growling faintly. Ethel rose and walked slowly toward him. "Hey, it's all right. You're not in danger." But Kane didn't take his eyes off the door. He was locked in. Then it happened. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Ethel froze mid-step. No one came to her door this late. Not in this part of town. Not during a storm. Kane moved like a shadow, placing himself directly in front of the door, growl deepening. Ethel whispered, "Stay here." And moved to the front window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek through. A black SUV was idling on the street. Its headlights were off. She felt a chill run down her spine. The knock came again. Louder this time. "Who is it?" she called, voice sharper than she expected. Silence. She stepped toward the door, but Kane blocked her path. He barked once, loud and firm. A warning. Then came a voice, muffled but clear. "You have something that belongs to us." Ethel's blood ran cold. "I don't know who you think you're talking about," she shouted back. "You need to leave." No response. Just the sound of a car door slamming, and the SUV peeling away into the storm. She stood there, frozen, her heart pounding in her ears. Kane didn't move for several minutes. Then, finally, he turned, nudged the pups gently with his nose, and laid back down. But Ethel knew he wasn't sleeping. Neither was she. The next morning, the storm had passed, but unease lingered like fog. Ethel poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from Cain. The pups were playful now, nudging at each other and chasing a sock she'd tied into a makeshift toy. "Cain," she said quietly. "Who's looking for you?" The knock. The SUV. The threat. She had no idea who those people were, but something told her they weren't from animal control or any official agency. Whoever they were, they had purpose. And that terrified her. Later that afternoon, Deputy Ross returned. Ethel filled him in on everything, the knock, the voice, the SUV. His expression darkened. "That doesn't sound like police. That sounds like private. Black market." Ethel covered her mouth in horror. "Why would they want Cain?" she asked. "Because he survived. That makes him valuable. He's still strong. Still loyal. They don't see him as a soul, just a weapon. But he has pups," she said, almost defensively. Ross looked down. "That may be part of it, too." The idea hit her like a punch. They didn't just want Cain. They wanted the bloodline. "I won't let them take him," she said, voice steel. Ross nodded. "We need to move them somewhere safe. Temporarily. I'll make some calls." That night, Ethel packed a small bag, just enough for the road. She wrapped the pups in soft towels, tucked them into a laundry basket, and Cain walked beside her without a leash, as if knowing they were leaving. As she pulled away from the house, she glanced at the rearview mirror. Her home, once so steady and calm, now felt like a target. Cain sat in the back seat, silent, watching the road. And somewhere behind them, in the shadows, someone was following. The drive was long and silent, the kind of silence that sits heavy in your chest. Ethel gripped the steering wheel tighter than she needed to, her knuckles white, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few minutes. Each pair of headlights in the distance made her stomach drop, but every time, they passed without incident. Cain lay in the back seat with his head resting between the two puppies, who had fallen asleep on a thick blanket. His eyes didn't close, though. They watched, unblinking. Alert. Always alert. Ethel whispered without looking back, "We're going to get somewhere safe, boy. I promise you that." By the time they arrived, it was nearly 10 p.m. The rain had started again, not the wild, violent storm of the night before, but a damp, relentless drizzle that soaked the gravel road leading up to the small cabin Deputy Ross had arranged. The place belonged to his uncle, who used it for fishing trips once or twice a year. Off-grid. No neighbors for miles. No cell reception. Ethel parked the car under the old pine trees and stepped out, her back aching from the tension. She opened the back door, and Cain hopped out gently, looking around, sniffing the air with caution. She lifted the basket of sleeping pups and followed him to the door. The inside was rustic and simple, one bedroom, a fireplace, a kitchenette, and just enough warmth to feel human. Ethel set the puppies down on a pile of towels in front of the fire and lit the logs Ross had left in a pile. Cain stayed by the door, ears twitching, still on edge. "You don't trust it yet, huh?" she said softly, sitting on the floor beside the pups. Cain glanced at her, then paced toward the window, looking out into the night. Ethel followed his gaze. Trees. Darkness. Nothing else. Still, her heart wouldn't settle. She heated a can of stew on the stove and divided it into a bowl for herself and a plate for Cain. When she placed it down, he didn't eat at first. He waited. Watched her, as if making sure it wasn't a trick. When he finally lowered his head to the food, she saw his whole body tremble for a second, not from fear. From exhaustion. "Whatever they did to you," she whispered, "you didn't deserve it." He stopped eating, looked at her, and for the first time since he'd arrived at her doorstep, he stepped forward and gently placed his head on her knee. Ethel froze. It was so small. So soft. But it carried more weight than 1,000 words. She ran a wrinkled hand along the top of his head, brushing over scars, old wounds, places where fur would never grow again. "You're not a weapon anymore," she said. "You're home." But the warmth of that moment faded quickly. The next day, Ethel stepped outside early, needing a moment alone. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. She looked out over the wooded path that led to the highway and thought about what Cain had endured. Who he had lost. Why he had come to her. That's when she saw it. Footprints in the mud. Not hers. Not Ross's. Fresh. Someone had been there during the night. She rushed back inside, locking the door behind her, her hands shaking. Cain stood instantly, sensing her panic, his body tensed, hackles rising. "They found us," she whispered. "Oh, Lord, they found us." She didn't wait. She threw the few supplies they had into her bag, scooped the puppies up again, and turned to Cain. "In the car. Now." But Cain didn't move. He looked at the door, and growled. A sound deep and guttural, from the pit of his soul. Then, a knock. 3 times. Again. The same rhythm. Ethel's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Cain. "Whatever they want from you, they'll have to go through me." And Cain stepped forward, standing between her and the door, teeth bared, ready for whatever came next. Because this time, he wasn't running. The knock echoed through the small cabin like a warning shot. Ethel's breath caught in her chest as she stood frozen behind Cain. Outside, the world was still. No birds. No wind. Just silence. Cain didn't bark this time. He just stood there, muscles coiled, tail low, growl like thunder in his throat. Ethel whispered, "Stay here." And moved to the front window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek through. A black SUV was idling on the street. Its headlights were off. She felt a chill run down her spine. The knock came again. Louder. More forceful. Then, a voice. Low. Calm. Male. "Cain." The dog's body jerked. The voice came again, softer now. "Cain, buddy. If that's really you." Cain stepped closer to the door. He wasn't growling anymore. He was listening. Ethel squinted, heart hammering. Do you know him?" Cain didn't move. Outside, the voice called again. "It's me. Cody." "Cain, I know it's been a long time. You probably thought I was dead." "Everyone did." Ethel gasped. "Cody." She flung open the door before logic could catch up to her fear. There, standing in the drizzle, was a man, mid-30s, soaked from the rain, with a beard that hadn't seen a razor in weeks and eyes so tired they looked carved from stone. His jacket bore a faded patch, US K9 unit. Retired. Cain froze. Cody took one cautious step forward, voice barely above a whisper. "They told me you ran off after the raid. I was hit, woke up in a hospital 4 states away. Took months to find out what really happened." Cain whimpered. Then, suddenly, he leapt. Not to attack. To embrace. The massive dog collided into Cody's chest with the force of a hurricane, knocking him back a step as he buried his face into the man's coat, tail wagging furiously, paws pressing against Cody's shoulders like he never wanted to let go. Cody dropped to his knees, arms wrapping around Cain. "I thought I lost you, buddy. I thought you were gone." Tears blurred Ethel's vision. She stepped outside, overwhelmed. "You're his handler." Cody looked up at her, eyes wet. "I was. He saved my life more times than I can count." What about the pups? She asked, voice shaking. Are they his? Cody nodded slowly. After the raid, there was chaos. Civilians. Abandoned dogs. Someone must have bred him illegally. He wouldn't leave them behind. That's just who he is. Ethel's voice cracked. Someone's been after him. After all of them. We had to run. Cody's face darkened. I know. I've been tracking them, too. There's a group, ex-military, underground. They steal retired canines. Reprogram them. Use them for private jobs. Dangerous ones. They must have seen Kane as valuable. Especially with pups. Kane let out a sharp bark, urgent. Protective. Behind them, a rustling in the trees. Cody was on his feet in seconds. Get inside. They all rushed into the cabin. Cody locked the door, eyes scanning every window. Kane paced the room, nose high, growl back in his throat. Do you have a gun? Cody asked. No, Ethel said. Just a fire poker. He nodded grimly. Then we hold until sunrise. Help's coming. How do you know? She asked. Because I sent a message before I came. If they don't hear back by dawn, they'll come looking. Outside, headlights flared briefly between the trees, then vanished. Ethel sank to the floor beside the puppies, wrapping them close. Kane stood between her and the door, Cody beside him, both facing the shadows outside. And in that moment, she realized. This wasn't just about a dog anymore. This was a soldier. A father. A protector. And he wasn't running anymore. The cabin was steeped in tension, lit only by the dim orange glow of the fireplace. Ethel sat on the floor with the puppies curled into her lap, their small bodies rising and falling with soft, steady breaths. Across the room, Kane stood shoulder to shoulder with Cody, both of them facing the door, unmoving. Their silhouettes cast tall and sharp against the walls. Outside, the forest was still. Too still. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the trees weren't swaying. No night animals stirred. There wasn't even the sound of crickets. Just the suffocating silence of something waiting. Cody loaded a single pistol, old, scratched, but reliable. He checked the door. The windows. The back exit. Every few minutes, he gave Kane a hand signal, and the dog would respond instantly. Ears perked. Body alert. Every muscle ready. Ethel broke the silence. Why would they come all this way for one dog? Her voice was soft, but there was something heavy in it. He's been through so much. Doesn't he deserve to rest? Cody didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, it was with a sorrowful calm. Kane was trained for high-risk detection. Urban warfare. Night assaults. But more than that, he was a symbol. Loyal. Brave. Controlled in chaos. He's the kind of dog they can't make, only find. And they don't care how broken he is now. They think they can rebuild him. Use him again. Ethel swallowed hard. But they won't. Right? He looked over at her. Not if we stop them. Kane's body tensed. A low, guttural growl escaped his throat. Cody rushed to the front window, peeking through the side. Headlights. Crawling up the path. 2 SUVs this time. He moved quickly, motioning for Ethel. Grab the pups. Take them into the bathroom. Lock the door. Do not come out until I say. I'm not leaving you. Please, Ethel. You've done more than enough. Let me protect you now. Kane nudged her toward the hallway with his nose, gently but firmly. Ethel picked up the puppies, her eyes brimming with tears. You come back to me, Kane. Do you hear me? Kane looked at her one last time, and let out a soft, almost human whimper. Then she disappeared into the shadows of the hall. Outside, the SUVs parked silently. No engines. No voices. Then, glass shattered. The back window. Cody crouched low, gun raised. Kane growled beside him, every inch of his body vibrating with readiness. A figure in dark gear appeared just inside the window frame. Kane launched forward like a bullet, teeth flashing. The man didn't even have time to react. One scream, short and sharp, and he was down. Then another. This time through the front door. Cody fired one shot, center mass. The attacker dropped. Kane spun, and faced the third man, who came from the kitchen side. Too fast. Too quiet. A tranquilizer gun. Kane charged, but the dart flew. It struck right in his shoulder. Kane! Cody yelled. The dog kept moving. Even with the tranquilizer in his system, Kane didn't slow. He hit the man full force, slamming him to the ground with a roar that shook the walls. Then, silence again. Cody rushed to Kane, catching him just as his legs began to wobble. Stay with me, buddy. Just a little longer. Ethel, hearing the quiet, cracked open the bathroom door. She gasped when she saw Kane collapse. No. She ran to them, cradling Kane's heavy body in her arms, tears falling onto his fur. You fought for us. You protected us. Kane's eyes fluttered. His breathing slowed. Then, headlights flashed outside again. Cody jumped to his feet. Wait, that's them. That's our backup. Two marked police vehicles skidded to a stop outside, officers spilling out, shouting commands, guns raised. It was over. The attackers were taken. The danger had passed. But Kane wasn't moving. Paramedics were called. They loaded him gently into the back of a cruiser, promising to give him the best care possible. Cody rode with them, refusing to leave Kane's side. Ethel stayed on the porch, the pups in her arms, watching the flashing lights fade into the distance. Her heart felt hollow. He had protected them. Until the end. The next 48 hours were a blur. Phone calls. Paperwork. Police interviews. Cody coordinated everything, making sure the truth was known, that Kane wasn't just a dog. He was a survivor. A hero. On the third morning, just after sunrise, a call came. Ethel. Cody's voice sounded tired but alive. You need to come see this. She arrived at the veterinary hospital an hour later, breath held tight in her chest. In the recovery room, lying on a soft blanket, was Kane. He lifted his head, and wagged his tail. Ethel dropped to her knees, crying freely. Kane struggled to his feet, weak but standing, and rested his head in her lap once more. He had come back to her. Again. The cabin was gone. So was the fear. Weeks had passed since the night Kane nearly gave everything to protect the only family he had left. And now, under the warm golden sun of a quiet spring morning, he lay on Ethel's porch once again, only this time, not trembling. Not broken. But whole. Cody had stayed for a while, helping rebuild the front fence and adding new locks to the doors. But in the end, he said what Ethel already knew. Kane belonged here now. With her. With his pups. With peace. The puppies had grown stronger. Braver. They followed Kane around like shadows, mimicking his every move, learning trust, patience, and strength the way only a father could teach. Ethel sat in her rocking chair, knitting a scarf she knew she'd never finish. She didn't need to. Just watching them, Kane sprawled under the sun, the pups tumbling in the grass, was enough. Once, Kane had been a soldier. A weapon. A ghost of war. Now, he was simply loved. And as the wind carried the laughter of children playing somewhere in the distance, Ethel smiled, knowing that sometimes, even the most broken souls find their way home. The end.